The man in the dusty duster didn't move. His hand hovered an inch from the worn leather of his holster. 3 men stood opposite, their own hands already tight on their grips. In the middle of the street, a woman knelt in the dust, her face a mask of defiant terror. The man with the silver star pinned to his vest, Silas Kane, smiled a predator's smile. "This is my town, stranger," Kane said, his voice smooth as oiled steel. "Her well is on my land. That makes her my property." The Nameless Gunfighter's eyes, the color of a winter sky, didn't leave Kane's. "I gave you my word," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She walks away." Kane's smile widened. He gestured to the woman. "Then you have a choice. Your word, or her life. Shoot me, and my men kill her. Let her go, and you break the only thing a man like you has left. What's it to be, ghost?" The dust swirled, and for a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind. It had started 3 days earlier, under a sun that baked the world to cracked pottery. Stories of men who live by the gun are etched in dust and blood. If you value such tales, subscribe to this channel, and bear witness. He rode into the town of Redemption's End on a horse that looked as tired as he did. The animal was a gaunt frame of bone and hide, its head low. The man on its back was no better. A long coat, the color of the road, fell over a lean frame. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face that gave away nothing. He was a man made of straight lines and hard angles. He stopped at the first trough he saw. It was bone dry. A chain was looped around the pump handle next to it, secured with a heavy, rust-pitted lock. A small, crudely painted sign was nailed to the post. "Water, S. Kane. Inquire at saloon." He dismounted. The squeak of his saddle leather was the loudest sound on the street. His boots made soft, rhythmic thuds in the thick dust. Every step was deliberate. Every glance from beneath his hat brim was a measurement. He saw closed doors, shuttered windows. The few faces that peered out were gone as soon as his gaze met theirs. This was a town holding its breath. He passed the sheriff's office. The sign was faded, the window dark. No one was home. He kept walking, his horse trailing behind, until he reached the saloon. The batwing doors were still. He pushed one open and stepped inside. The air was stale with the scent of cheap whiskey and old sweat. It was cooler, a pocket of shadow in the blinding afternoon. A few men sat at tables, nursing drinks. They looked up as he entered, their eyes lingering on the Colt peacemaker tied low on his right hip. The grip was worn smooth, the bluing faded to a dull gray. It was not a showpiece. It was a tool. The men looked away. A big man with a gut that spilled over his belt buckle stood behind the bar, wiping a glass with a dirty rag. He had a shotgun leaning against the wall behind him, within easy reach. The man's eyes were small and suspicious. The Nameless Gunfighter walked to the bar. He didn't speak. He just stood there, waiting. His stillness was a weight in the room. The bartender finished with his glass, setting it down with a deliberate thud. "What'll it be?" "Water. For my horse." The bartender grunted. He jerked a thumb toward the back. "Yard trough. 2 bits." The stranger laid a coin on the bar. It was worn, the eagle barely visible. He didn't move. "And for me. Whiskey's $1. "Water," the stranger repeated. His voice was flat. Unchanging. The bartender's eyes narrowed. "Water ain't free. Not in this town. Not anymore." He gestured with his chin at a large barrel in the corner, also chained and locked. "Mr. Kane controls the water. You want a drink, you buy his whiskey. That's the rule." The nameless gunfighter's gaze drifted to the barrel, then back to the bartender. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked out, leaving the 2-bit coin on the bar. The silence he left behind was heavier than the one he'd walked into. Outside, the sun was a hammer. He led his horse down the street, his eyes scanning. The town was built on desperation. Every plank of wood seemed to be warped by thirst. Then he saw it. At the far end of the main street, just past the derelict blacksmith's shop, was a small eatery. A simple, hand-painted sign read, "Ilara's Kitchen." Smoke, thin and pale, curled from its stone chimney. In front of it, a woman was drawing a bucket from a well. The sound of the rope on the wooden wheel was a song in the dead-quiet town. He walked toward her. She heard his steps and turned. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her late 20s. Her face was smudged with flour, but her eyes were clear and steady. She had the look of someone who had faced hardship and refused to be broken by it. She watched him approach, her hand resting on the stone lip of the well. She was not afraid. Just cautious. "Ma'am," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. He touched the brim of his hat. "My horse needs water." She looked from him to the gaunt animal, whose head was now raised, its nostrils flaring at the scent of moisture. She nodded. "The trough is empty." It was a statement, not a question. "It's locked." A flicker of something, anger, weariness, passed through her eyes. "Of course it is." She looked at him again, a long, assessing gaze. He stood perfectly still, letting her look. She saw the dust, the exhaustion, the weapon. But she also saw something in the way he held himself. A man who was not asking for a handout, but stating a need. She picked up the heavy wooden bucket and carried it to a small, empty trough near her door. The water splashed, clear and cool. The horse moved forward without being led, plunging its muzzle in and drinking deeply. The man watched his horse. He didn't speak again until the animal was finished. "I'm obliged." "Everyone gets thirsty," she said simply. She went back to the well and drew another bucket. She poured some into a dipper and held it out to him. He took it, drank it down in 3 long swallows. The water was cold, clean. It tasted of the earth. He handed the dipper back. "I can pay," he said, reaching into his coat. "No need," she said, turning away. "It's just water." He watched her for a moment. "In this town," he said, his voice low, "it seems that's not true." She stopped, her back to him. "That's Silas Kane's law. Not mine." She went inside without another word. He stayed by the trough, letting his horse rest in the sliver of shade cast by the eatery. From here, he could see the whole street. He saw the way people moved, hurrying from one shadow to the next. He saw the hard, possessive stares from the men lounging on the porch of the saloon, Kane's men. They all wore the same look of casual brutality. This well, this woman, was an island in a sea of Kane's making. An act of defiance that could not last. He knew the shape of this story. He'd seen it before in other towns, with other names. An hour passed. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. The door to the eatery opened. Ilara stepped out, a basket in her hand. She was headed for the small house behind her kitchen. Before she had taken 3 steps, 2 men detached themselves from the saloon porch and walked to intercept her. They were the kind of men who enjoyed their work. Big, swaggering, their spurs jingling with false importance. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a sneer that seemed permanent, stepped in her path. "Evenin', Ilara. Cookin' up something good for Mr. Kane." She tried to step around him. "I'm closing up, Jeb." The other man, leaner and with shifty eyes, blocked her other side. "Now, hold on. Mr. Kane sent us. Said he was feelin' neighborly. Wants to make sure you're not lonely out here all by yourself." Jeb reached out and grabbed the basket from her hand. Bread and some wrapped meat fell into the dust. "Look what you did. Clumsy." He laughed. Ilara's jaw tightened. She knelt to pick up the food. As she did, Jeb put a heavy, dirty hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging in. "Leave it. We got better things for you to do." "Get your hand off me," she said, her voice low and shaking with rage. "Or what?" Jeb grinned, showing stained teeth. "Gonna cry to the sheriff?" "Oh, that's right. Mr. Kane is the sheriff." The Nameless Gunfighter had not moved from his spot in the shade. His body was still, but his eyes were fixed on the scene. He watched the man's hand on the woman's shoulder. He saw her flinch. He saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide behind her anger. His own hand, which had been resting on his thigh, slowly, almost imperceptibly, moved to hang loosely at his side. The economy of movement was absolute. No wasted motion. No signal. He began to walk forward. His boots made no sound in the deep dust. The two men were focused on the woman, laughing at her helplessness. They didn't notice him until he was 10 feet away. "That's enough," he said. The words were not loud. They were not a threat. They were a statement of fact. A period at the end of a sentence. Jeb and his partner turned. They saw him standing there, a tall shadow against the setting sun. Jeb's hand was still on Ilara's shoulder. He didn't let go. "Well, look what we have here," Jeb sneered. "A drifter with a big mouth. This ain't your business, friend." "You're hurting the lady," the stranger said. His gaze was locked on Jeb's hand. "Take it off." The lean man chuckled, his hand dropping to his own pistol. "He told you to take it off, Jeb. You gonna listen to him?" Jeb tightened his grip. Ilara gasped in pain. "I think the lady likes it. You just ride on out of here, old man, before you get hurt." The Nameless Gunfighter didn't look at the lean man. He didn't look at Ilara. His eyes were only for Jeb. He gave him the warning. The only one he would get. "Let her go," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "And walk away." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Jeb's stupid, arrogant grin faltered. He saw something in the stranger's pale eyes that he hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was a complete and total absence of everything but purpose. It was the look of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. But pride is a powerful poison. Jeb couldn't back down now, not in front of his partner. Not in front of the whole town, which was now watching from behind parted curtains. "Go to hell," Jeb snarled, and his other hand went for his gun. He never cleared leather. The Nameless Gunfighter's draw was not a blur of motion. It was a single, clean, impossible act. One moment, his hand was at his side. The next, the Colt was in his fist, level and steady. The sound of the shot was shockingly loud in the silent street. It was a flat, hard crack that echoed off the false fronts of the buildings. Jeb's eyes went wide with surprise. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of his chest. His hand, the one that had been on Ilara's shoulder, fell away. His other hand was still tangled in the grip of his own unfired pistol. He looked down at his chest, a confused expression on his face, then he crumpled into the dust without a sound. The lean man froze, his own gun half-drawn. He stared at his dead partner, then at the stranger, whose Colt was now aimed squarely at his face. The bore of the barrel looked like a dark, bottomless cave. The stranger hadn't moved a muscle. He hadn't blinked. "You," the stranger said, his voice like stones grinding together. "Drop it." The lean man's hand flew open as if the gun had burned him. It thudded into the dust. "Now leave." The man scrambled backwards, kicking up dust, his eyes wide with terror. He turned and ran, stumbling toward the saloon, shouting a name. "Cain." "He shot Jeb." "He shot him." The street was silent again, save for the ragged breathing of the woman still kneeling on the ground. The nameless gunfighter stood over the body of the man he had just killed. He did not look at him. He looked at Alara. He lowered the Colt, the barrel still smoking. He did not reholster it. He held it in his hand, a heavy, ugly piece of metal. He walked over to her. He didn't offer a hand. He just stood there, his presence a shield. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, unable to speak. She finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and a new, more profound fear. She had been saved, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not the end of it. It was the beginning. The batwing doors of the saloon burst open. Silas Cain stepped out onto the porch, flanked by 4 more of his men. He was not a big man, but he carried himself with an unshakable air of authority. He was dressed in a fine black coat and a clean white shirt, a stark contrast to the grime of the town he owned. A silver star was pinned to his vest. He wasn't the law. He was just the man who wore the star. His eyes took in the scene at a glance. The body in the street. The terrified man who had run to him. The woman on her knees. And the stranger, standing over her like a grim statue, a smoking pistol in his hand. Cain's face was unreadable. He walked down the steps and into the street, his men fanning out behind him. He stopped 20 feet from the stranger. He looked down at Jeb's body, his lip curling in a faint expression of distaste, as if at a piece of poorly made furniture. "Jeb was a fool," Cain said, his voice calm and conversational. "But he was my fool." He looked up, his dark eyes finally meeting the stranger's. "You have a name?" "No." Cain almost smiled. "A man with no name. How fitting. You just killed an employee of mine, in my town. I'm the law here. That makes this a problem." He put his hands on the lady, the stranger replied. It was not an excuse. It was a fact. "The lady," Cain said, his gaze shifting to Alara, "lives on my charity. Her well is a thorn in my side. Her defiance is an inconvenience. Everything in this valley, stranger, is mine. The land, the water, the people. You interfered with my property." The stranger ejected the spent shell from his Colt. The small brass casing spun in the air and landed silently in the dust. He methodically thumbed a fresh cartridge into the empty chamber. The clicks of the cylinder turning were the only sounds. It was his ritual. Quiet. Heavy. "She's not property," he said, not looking up from his task. Cain's composure finally cracked. A flash of cold fury lit his eyes. "In redemption's end, I decide what is and what is not. You have made a grave mistake. You should have kept riding." He looked at his men. "He shot first. You all saw it." His men nodded, their hands moving to their guns. The stranger snapped the loading gate of his Colt shut. The sound was a final, metallic punctuation mark. He raised his head, his pale eyes meeting Cain's. "I offered him the chance to walk away," he said. "I'm offering it to you now." Cain laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "You are one man. I have 5. The odds are not in your favor." "There are 4 of you," the stranger corrected him, his gaze flicking to the men behind Kane. Your man who ran is hiding behind the door. And your numbers don't change the outcome. A nervous silence fell. Kane's men shifted on their feet. This was not the kind of man they were used to. He didn't boast. He didn't threaten. He just stated things as if they were already true. Kane's smile returned, colder this time. He was enjoying this. The challenge. I like a man with conviction. It's a shame I'll have to bury you with it. But not today. A public hanging is better for morale. Reminds people of the rules. He gestured to his men. Take him. Before they could move, Elara scrambled to her feet. She stood between the Nameless Gunfighter and Kane's men. No, she cried. He was defending me. Jeb was. Kane cut her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. Your opinion, my dear Elara, is irrelevant. He looked back at the stranger. You see. You tried to play the hero, and all you've done is make her situation worse. After I'm done with you, I will burn her kitchen to the ground. I will board up her well. And I will see to it that she understands the true meaning of gratitude. The stranger's expression did not change, but a new tension entered his stillness. The air around him grew cold. The threat was not to him. It was to her. The one he had chosen to protect. This changed the equation. He took a half step to the side, moving Elara behind him. This is between you and me, he said to Kane. Leave her out of it. Oh, she's been in it since the day her husband was foolish enough to dig a well without my permission, Kane said pleasantly. You are merely the final act. He nodded to his men. Now. The world exploded in gunfire. But the stranger had anticipated it. The moment Kane nodded, he was moving. He shoved Elara toward the cover of her own storefront, a hard, impersonal push to get her out of the line of fire. In the same motion, his Colt came up. He didn't aim at Kane. He aimed at the men beside him. The first shot took the man on Kane's right. The second took the man on his left. The shots were so close together they sounded like one. 2 men fell. The other 2 were already firing, their bullets kicking up dust around the stranger's feet, splintering the wood of the building behind him. He fired again. A third man clutched his shoulder and staggered back. The fourth hesitated, his nerve breaking. That hesitation was his last. The stranger's fourth shot was as deliberate and final as the first. The man dropped his gun and fell backwards. 4 shots. 4 men down. It had taken less than 3 seconds. Silas Kane stood frozen, untouched. He had not even drawn his weapon. He stared, his face a mixture of shock and dawning fury, at the bodies of his men littered in the dust. The entire town had fallen silent. The only sound was the wind, whistling a lonely tune through the bullet holes in the walls. The stranger stood his ground, the Colt held ready. Smoke curled from the barrel. He had not come here for this. He had come for water. Now he was in the middle of a war he hadn't asked for. He looked at Kane, who was slowly, deliberately, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Well, Kane said, a strange, tight smile on his face. That was impressive. You are clearly a man of some talent. The stranger did not respond. He kept the gun leveled. But you've made a mess of my street, Kane continued, his voice regaining its smooth, dangerous edge. And you've cost me a significant investment in manpower. He lowered his hands slowly. This isn't over. You can't kill all of us. From the windows and doorways, other men began to appear. Kane's men. They had been in the saloon, in the general store, in the shadows. 10, then 15 of them, all armed. They formed a loose, closing circle. Elara, from the doorway of her eatery, let out a small, choked cry. They were surrounded. The stranger's eyes scanned the growing crowd. He showed no fear. No concern. Only a cold, calculating assessment of the new reality. He had won the battle. But Cain was right. He had not won the war. You have one bullet left, I believe, Cain said, his confidence returning. Who is it for? Me. One of them. Or perhaps, yourself. The stranger didn't answer. He slowly lowered the hammer on his Colt and slid it back into its holster. The action was a surrender, yet it felt like a threat. He stood there, empty-handed, in the middle of a circle of armed men, and somehow, he still seemed to be the one in control. Take him to the ice house, Cain ordered his men, his voice sharp with command. And take her, too. Lock them in. We'll have our hanging in the morning, when the whole town can see. 2 men grabbed the stranger's arms. He did not resist. They were rough, but he remained placid. His body was tense, but it was the tension of a coiled spring, not of fear. As they tied his hands behind his back, his eyes found Elara's. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a command. Do not fight. Not now. Other men grabbed her. She struggled, but it was useless. They were dragged past the bodies, through the dust, toward a squat, windowless building at the edge of town. The heavy, insulated door of the icehouse groaned open, revealing a dark, cold interior. They were shoved inside. The door slammed shut, and the heavy bar fell into place. Darkness. And a deep, biting cold. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was their own breathing, visible as white puffs in the frigid air. The icehouse was used to store blocks cut from the mountain river in winter. A few large, burlap-shrouded blocks still remained, radiating a damp chill that sank into the bones. A single sliver of moonlight pierced a crack in the roof, providing the faintest of light. I'm sorry, Elara's voice came out of the darkness. It was small, trembling. I brought this on you. He was a silhouette against the faint light from the door crack. His hands were tied, but he stood as straight as ever. You didn't. But my refusal to. If I had just given in to him. He would have taken it anyway, the stranger said. His voice was flat. Men like Cain don't share. They conquer. Your well was an excuse. Your spirit was the challenge. She fell silent. He was right. She had always known it. What's your name? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He was quiet for a long moment. It doesn't matter. It was buried a long time ago. They're going to hang you. That's their plan. We have to get out of here. Her voice rose with panic. There has to be a way out. He didn't answer. He was listening. Not to her, but to the building. To the night. He was feeling the temperature, the humidity, the way the wood of the walls groaned under the cold. He was a man who survived by noticing the details others missed. He walked over to the door, his boots crunching on the sawdust-covered floor. He pressed his shoulder against it. Solid oak. The bar on the outside was heavy. There would be no breaking it down. He moved along the walls, running his bound hands over the thick timbers. He was searching for a weakness. A loose board. A rotten patch. This was the part of his life he hated. The quiet moments of calculation. The violence was simple, clean. The aftermath was always complicated. He had followed his instinct to protect. He had upheld his unwritten rules. And the cost, as always, was getting higher. He had not only failed to save her, he had dragged her down with him. The thought settled in his gut like a cold stone. Here, he said. He had stopped near one of the blocks of ice. He knelt, turning his back to it. He began to saw the ropes binding his wrists against a sharp, metal corner of the ice tongs that had been left lying on the floor. It was slow, painstaking work. The rope was thick, the metal dull. Elara came closer, watching him. "What are you doing?" "Making a choice," he said, the words coming out in puffs of white. The rope bit into his skin, but he didn't flinch. He just kept sawing, back and forth, with a steady, relentless rhythm. He thought of Cain's words. The threat to her. It had been specific. Deliberate. Cain wasn't just going to kill him. He was going to make an example of her. That was the real stake. Not his life. Hers. The first strand of the rope snapped. Then another. He worked faster, his muscles straining. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the town. Drunken laughter from the saloon. Cain's men celebrating their victory. They thought it was over. They were wrong. Finally, the ropes gave way. His hands were free. They were raw and bleeding, but they were free. He rubbed his wrists, his face grim in the faint light. He stood up and went to the back wall. He'd felt it earlier. A section where the chinking between the logs was crumbling. "Help me," he said to Elara. Together, they began to work at the wall. Using the heavy ice tongs as a makeshift crowbar, he jammed it into the cracks, levering and twisting. The wood was old but strong. It groaned in protest. Sawdust and dried mud rained down on them. It was slow, agonizing work. Every sound seemed to magnify in the silence, a drumbeat announcing their escape. Hours passed. His hands were numb with cold, blistered from the effort. Elara worked beside him, her fear replaced by a desperate, focused energy. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. Finally, with a loud crack, a log shifted. A sliver of the moonlit night appeared. He put his shoulder to it and pushed. The log gave way, then another. The opening was small, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. He looked at Elara. "You first." She hesitated. "What about you?" "Go. Get out of town. Head east. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce. "They'll kill you." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his pale eyes. A deep, profound weariness. "They can try," he said. He checked the street through the opening. It was empty. The party at the saloon was still going. "Go. Now." She squeezed through the hole, and he followed right after her, pulling the loose logs back into place as best he could. They were in a dark alley behind the ice house. The air outside was warm, a shocking contrast to the frigid cell. He retrieved his gun belt and Colt, which one of Cain's men had foolishly hung on a nail outside the ice house door, a trophy to be claimed in the morning. He checked the action. It was his only friend in the world. Solid. Reliable. Deadly. He slid it back into its holster. It felt right. A familiar weight. "My house," Elara whispered. "There's a rifle there." "My husband's." He nodded. One pistol against a town of armed men was long odds, even for him. A rifle would change the math. They moved through the shadows, ghosting from one building to the next. The town was asleep, save for the bright lights and noise of the saloon. They reached her small home behind the eatery without incident. While she retrieved the rifle, a Winchester, and a box of cartridges, he went to the well. He drank deeply, then filled a water skin. He was methodical. Preparing for a long fight. When she came out, she handed him the rifle. He took it, his hands checking the mechanism with an expert's touch. "You should leave," he said again, not looking at her. "It's not your fight." "You made it my fight when you stood up for me," she replied, her voice steady. "Where do we go?" He looked out at the dark street, toward the saloon. Kane and his men were in there. Celebrating. Unaware. He could slip away into the night. He could ride east and never look back. It would be the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But he thought of Kane's promise. To burn her kitchen. To board her well. To make her an example. He had given his word, unspoken, the moment he drew his gun for her. His word was absolute. Both ways. Leaving now would be a lie. He had never lied to someone who trusted him first. It was one of his rules. A line in the sand he had drawn for himself long ago. This was the code moment. The pause. He could leave her to her fate, saving himself, or he could stay and face an entire town to honor a promise he never actually spoke aloud. The cost of his principles, laid bare in the moonlight. He looked at her, standing there with a defiance set to her jaw, ready to fight for the home she had built. He exhaled, a slow, weary breath. "We don't run," he said. "We finish it." The plan was simple. It was desperate. They couldn't fight the whole town at once. They had to choose the ground. And they had to separate Kane from his men. "Kane is arrogant," he said, his voice a low whisper in the darkness. "He thinks he's already won. We use that." He gave Alara the rifle. "You know how to use this?" She nodded. "My husband taught me. Stay here. On the roof of your kitchen. It gives you a view of the whole street. Don't fire unless I do. Or unless they see you." "What are you going to do?" "Invite Mr. Kane to a private conversation." He moved back into the shadows, a ghost in the night. He circled around the back of the buildings, silent as smoke, until he was across the street from the saloon. He found what he was looking for, the livery stable. Kane's prize horse, a magnificent black stallion, was in the main stall. A symbol of his wealth and power. With a piece of flint and steel from his pouch, he lit a small bundle of hay. He didn't start a massive fire. Just enough to create thick, acrid smoke. He tossed it into an empty stall filled with dry tinder. Within moments, the smoke began to billow out, thick and gray. The horses inside began to panic, their whinnies sharp and terrified. He slipped away, back into the shadows, positioning himself in the dark space between the assayer's office and the general store. He had a clear line of sight to the saloon doors. The cry of "Fire!" went up. Men poured out of the saloon, drunk and confused. Their first thought was their horses. They ran toward the livery, a disorganized mob. Silas Kane came out last. He stood on the porch, his face black with rage as he saw the smoke pouring from his stable. His fine clothes were disheveled. "Put it out, you fools," he roared. "Get my horse out of there." As his men scrambled to fight the fire, Kane stood alone, isolated. It was the moment the stranger had been waiting for. He stepped out of the shadows. "Kane," he called out. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos. Kane spun around, his hand instinctively going to the silver-plated revolver on his hip. He saw the stranger standing 100 feet away, a lone figure in the moonlit street. "You," Kane hissed, his voice venomous. "I'll kill you myself." "You can try," the stranger said. He began to walk forward, slowly, deliberately. His boots crunched in the dust. "Your men are busy. It's just you and me. The way it should have been." Kane's arrogance took over. He saw a chance to put down this rebellion himself, to prove his authority in front of the whole town. He smiled, a thin, cruel line. "You're a dead man." He drew his pistol. The shot came not from the stranger, but from the roof of the eatery. The crack of the rifle was sharp and clear. Kane's pistol flew from his hand, spinning through the air before clattering on the wooden boardwalk. He cried out, clutching his hand, which was now a bloody mess. He stared in disbelief at his hand, then looked up at the roof where Alara stood with the Winchester, a determined silhouette against the night sky. The stranger had not drawn his weapon. He had not moved. He had used Kane's arrogance against him, and he had trusted Alara to do her part. He had never lied to someone who trusted him first. He had trusted her, and she had not failed. Kane's men, hearing the shot, turned from the fire. They saw their leader disarmed, the stranger advancing, and a sniper on the roof. They were caught in a crossfire. "Kill them!" Kane shrieked, his voice cracking with pain and fury. "Kill them both!" But his men hesitated. Their confidence was shattered. They were facing a ghost who couldn't be killed and a woman who didn't miss. The stranger drew his Colt. He held it loosely at his side. He wasn't looking at the men. He was looking only at Kane. "It's over, Kane," he said. "Tell them to drop their guns. Walk away. The town doesn't have to die with you." This was the final warning. The final chance. Kane, cradling his wounded hand, stared at him with pure hatred. His empire was crumbling in a matter of minutes. His authority was a joke. He was bleeding in the street in front of the very people he had terrorized. "Never," Kane snarled. He reached for a backup pistol tucked in his belt with his good hand. The stranger fired. A single shot. It struck Kane square in the chest. He staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face. He collapsed onto the steps of his own saloon, the silver star on his chest tarnished with blood. The remaining men stood frozen. Their leader was dead. The fight was gone from them. One by one, they dropped their guns into the dust. They raised their hands. The stranger walked forward until he stood over Kane's body. He looked down, his face impassive. There was no triumph. No satisfaction. Just the quiet, heavy finality of a thing that had to be done. He turned and looked up at the roof. Alara was still there, the rifle held ready. Their eyes met across the dusty street. He gave her a single, slow nod. Acknowledgement. Thanks. Goodbye. He walked to his horse, which was still tied in front of the eatery. He checked the cinch, put his foot in the stirrup, and swung himself into the saddle. He didn't look back at the town. He didn't look at the defeated men. He didn't look at the body of Silas Kane. Alara came down from the roof. She stood in the street and watched him. The people of Redemption's End were slowly emerging from their homes, blinking in the moonlight at their sudden, violent freedom. "Wait," she called out. He stopped his horse but did not turn around. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere else," he said to the night. "Will you come back?" He was silent for a long moment. He thought of the life he led. The dust, the violence, the endless riding. He was a guardian, but never a resident. A storm that passes through, cleaning the air, but never staying. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He nudged his horse with his heels, and the animal began to walk, carrying him out of town, a lone rider heading into the vast, dark emptiness of the desert. He was just a ghost, leaving nothing behind but a story and a dead man in the street. The stories of the Old West are written by the choices men make when everything is on the line. If you want to see where the trail leads next, subscribe, and ride with us.